David, let's get started with what has happened to Donald Trump. They tried to assassinate Donald Trump, that was failed. What's your interpretation of what has happened?
Well, I think this was really a historic moment, with the failed assassination attempt on Donald Trump. I think he's in some ways a different person. He decided to respond with a plea for unity, a national unity, which he echoed at the convention, I think, quite well. And I think he's more determined than ever to implement his America First agenda, and that agenda notably includes peace with Russia. He wants to end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours. He's picked a vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, senator from Ohio, who is extremely well known for his views in opposing any aid to Ukraine, as that serves to perpetuate and elongate the war in Ukraine, causing the deaths of hundreds of thousands of more Ukrainians. We know that about 300,000 have died so far, with another 700,000 wounded. So the costs for Biden's manufactured war in Ukraine have been extremely high for Ukraine.
Yeah. How about JD Vance? How do you see him and why do you think he's so important?
Well, during his first term, President Trump had Mike Pence as his vice president, and Mike Pence is a neoconservative. I call them neo-imperialists, and Mike Pence, sabotaged so many of President Trump's America First initiatives. Trying to kind of pull U.S. troops out of Europe, out of the Middle East, to end the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. And Pence tried to prevent Trump from hiring cabinet officials and sub-cabinet officials that shared Trump's America First conservative agenda, and instead recommended he hire neoconservatives. So the entire time, that he seemed to be good. He seemed to be echoing what President Trump was saying. He was sabotaging Trump behind the scenes. So with J.D. Vance as his running mate, President Trump has proven that he is not going to make that mistake again. The person whispering in his ear and giving him advice that he looks to is going to be someone who agrees with him, who's going to reinforce all of his very realistic America First agenda principles, most notably on foreign policy. And that should be a great relief to the world. Instead, we hear the European and NATO leaders are stressed out that Trump is going to actually follow through with his promises to restore peace and stability to Europe, which is something that if I was a European, I would be very happy to hear.
Yeah. But do you feel that the Europeans, because we know that Orban is doing everything right now to bring some sort of sanity to what's going on in Europe towards Ukraine, but he's some sort of isolated right now. And do you think that Trump would be able to improve the position of Orban or Fico in Europe?
I do. Yeah, I think that Trump would strongly support and reinforce the positions of Hungarian President Orban and also uh, Robert Fico in Slovakia, who was recently, and of course we know that he was assassinated by a deranged pro-Ukrainian, leftist. Um, and President Trump has a plan to he calls it to restructure NATO. And when he refers to restructuring NATO, what he really wants to do is to make Europe self-sufficient in terms of its ability to defend itself, and instead of relying on the United States for military forces and defense dollars, he wants to see Europe provide for its own defense needs, and I think that would be an excellent move. That would entail withdrawing U.S. troops from Eastern Europe. That's something that Russia has said is a priority to de-escalate tensions with prevent future conflicts and to limit U.S. military bases to Germany, Turkey, and England. So I think that's completely in line with the foreign policy that Orban and Fico have stated that they want to see happen in NATO.
And do you think that the Europeans are feeling that the changes are happening in the United States with Donald Trump? And because we don't see any sort of sign coming out of Europe that shows it seems that they still have some sort of hope for Democratic Party to win. How do you find this type of attitude on their part?
Well, it's really interesting because if I was European, I would want to put my country first, and I would want to, again, restore peace and stability, and I would want to support policies that would increase the security of my country and or the region if I was more of a European versus a nationalist, and yet we see the Europeans, supporting Biden and Harris, who's really for their foreign policy objectives are to keep Europe as Europeans as essentially U.S. satellites or imperial dependencies, protectorates that rely on the U.S. for their security and lack the capacity to defend themselves. So obviously, if they had a good force of nuclear weapons, if they had a strong force of a large armies and armed forces, which they do not, then they'd be immune to any political changes happening in the United States. So again, it's contrary to their best interests, their national interests, to continue to be U.S. protectorates when, in fact, a new president could end their protectorate status and leave them vulnerable to enemy attack. Of course, the bigger issue is that they're supporting war with Russia. This NATO proxy war with Russia, which if they were on their own, I think their foreign policy would be very different. Obviously, if we weren't sending massive amounts of money and arms to Ukraine, Zelensky would have, he would have signed the Istanbul peace agreement, and the war would have ended, 2 to 2.5 years ago, with essentially Ukrainian victory in some respects, because Russia had pledged to withdraw all of its forces back to their pre-war borders in return for Ukraine's neutrality and demilitarization.
We had 4 years of vice presidency of Kamala Harris. How do you find her, in your opinion? Because many people are raising question about, is she able to be the president of the United States?
Well, I mean, in some respects, I think she's obviously more capable. Certainly, physically, she doesn't have any impediments as Biden does. I mean, Biden struggled to walk up the short stairs of Air Force One after reportedly getting COVID. But I suspect the COVID diagnosis is just a cover story for the fact that his health has deteriorated substantially just during the last month since the debate. His brother Frank Biden stated in a press release that it was due to his deteriorating health that Biden decided to step down. But in terms of Kamala Harris, I mean, her she doesn't suffer from any known mental incapacity. But in terms of her statements, obviously her speaking skills are lacking. She seems to be of average or below average intelligence based on her statements about Ukraine, for example, and other things. And she laughs. She nervously laughs whenever she doesn't know the answer to a question. And in the case of, I think it was an appearance with, I think it was maybe the German chancellor last year, or someone in NATO, another allied leader. She was asked about a question about immigration, U.S. immigration issues, and she tried to punt towards to the German leader when obviously the German leader had nothing to do with U.S. immigration policy. So she does seem poorly suited to serve as our president. I think she's been a poor vice president, but at the same time, I'm extremely happy and gratified that Democrats, they didn't do the right thing for the country. At least that wasn't their motivation. They did what they felt was necessary for the Democrat Party to save it from being wiped out in the elections. But nevertheless, it was a blessing for the country and perhaps the world that Biden was forced to drop out of the race, even with Kamala replacing him, I think.
One of the biggest question right now is, has Donald Trump learned anything from his first term? Many people are thinking that he's going to have the same kind of problems that he had during those days. Do you think these people are going to capture his administration, or Trump has learned from his first term that he's not going to let these people capture in his administration?
I think that that has always been a big risk, that President Trump would repeat the same mistakes in appointing deep state officials as his senior cabinet heads. But I think this pick of J.D. Vance as his vice president really signals that he's learned that lesson, that he knows that picking people that are going to sabotage his agenda, neoconservatives like John Bolton, who have backbited him to no end, and all these other officials that he picked, especially to Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State, that's going to prevent him from, it's going to really impede his presidential legacy, and it could be could cause another impeachment. I mean, it was his appointment of folks that were deep state saboteurs that caused him to be impeached in the first place, I think. So I think that's always a risk. I think that Robert O'Brien, for example, he was national security advisor to Trump in the first term, and he's been rumored to be a top pick for Secretary of State. I think he's much more neoconservative. I think that he would kind of still steer a middle road in terms of advancing Trump's agenda, while also advising him not to do a lot of things that he wants to do in terms of restructuring NATO, perhaps ending the war in Ukraine with a permanent peace agreement with Russia that's more comprehensive, along the lines that I proposed about a week ago, with essentially welcoming Russia into the security architecture of Europe, having an kind of a Russo-American detente, similar to the Entente Cordiale between Britain and France in 1904, that ended centuries of military enmity and disputes and wars. But I have to say, I'm optimistic after his pick of J.D. Vance. I think the chances are good. I don't think the neoconservatives can force Trump into a war against Russia or China. I think that he will absolutely come down as opposing that if China were to invade Taiwan, in late January 2025, and Trump were president. I think that there's no way that Trump could be persuaded to fight them directly.
Yeah. One of the main issues would be how Trump gonna convince Vladimir Putin that the policy of the United States gonna change toward Ukraine and toward Russia. How, in your opinion, how Trump would be able to do that?
He can do that by offering terms that are mostly acceptable to Russia. I mean, Russia's obviously Putin's peace terms have been well known for virtually the entire war, at least from the standpoint of those who are willing to listen to Russian state media and government officials. And so the peace plan, if he were to use the peace plan that I've devised most recently in my article about how Trump could potentially win the Nobel Peace Prize for a comprehensive peace agreement ending the war in Ukraine and ending the Cold War with Russia, then I think that's something he can implement pretty quickly, really as little as a day's negotiation, but probably more realistically a few days. And the key is he has to have like a one-on-one summit with Vladimir Putin. That's how these types of deals get negotiated quickly. If they pursue a policy of continuing to aid, Zelensky as long as he starts peace negotiations with Russia, those negotiations will go on indefinitely because Zelensky will have no incentive to agree to peace with Russia as long as he continues to receive financial and arms shipments from the United States. So in answer to your question, I think that Trump has a completely different attitude than Biden. Trump wanted peace with Russia in 2016. That's why they tried to prevent him from winning. Why they tried to impeach him. He was impeached in December of 2019 by the Democrat-led House of Representatives because he refused to start World War III with Russia by sending massive arms shipments to Ukraine. And I think he's going to stay that course if he's reelected president.
Yeah, people who are criticizing Donald Trump, they're saying that, first of all, Donald Trump continued sending weapons to Ukraine, and then tremendous sanctions on Russia, and INF Treaty during. And do you think all of these activities, all of these action have been made by these neocons in his administration? He had no choice, just following them?
Well, in terms of the added sanctions on Russia, those were congressionally passed, and so he had very little. I mean, he may have been able to veto them, but essentially it was passed overwhelmingly by Congress. So he didn't really have a lot of leeway in terms of that. In terms of the arms shipments, that was a foolish decision. I think that was advised to him by his neoconservative advisors. And I think if he knew what he knew now, he wouldn't have done that. But that's certainly a valid criticism that Obama refused to send arms to Ukraine, and Trump was the first one to do so with the Javelin anti-tank guided missile shipments that he started sending, I think, as early as 2017, or maybe it was 2019. Actually, I think it was. He actually never suspended those shipments. Even though he was suspended or he was impeached for supposedly suspending those shipments. The Democrats' own impeachment witnesses proved that he never did. But that was certainly a mistake to provide arms to Ukraine. But he did so on a very limited basis. I mean, I think it was like 50 to 100 million worth of arms. Obviously Biden's provided like at least 75 billion. So it wasn't enough to really make a difference. But obviously the optics were bad. Yeah, I think that's valid. I think it was really those things were I think Trump was under tremendous pressure by the Trump-Russia collusion hoax to keep his distance from Putin. If you look at the pictures of him and Putin, the summit, one or two summits that they had while he was president, you won't be able to find a picture of Trump smiling because even though I think Trump was happy to work with Putin and for peace and greater understanding with the U.S. between the U.S. and Russia, he was very acutely aware that he wanted to avoid any appearance of him being Putin's friend, essentially, let alone ally. Of course, he's never Putin's ally. But he wanted friendship with Russia, just as he wanted friendship with China. And I think in the next administration, he's going to be able to clean house, especially in the FBI and the Department of Justice, if he appoints the right people. And they'll be able to fire a lot of these Biden and Obama officials that work to sabotage him and get him impeached in his prior administration.
Yeah. In your opinion, when it comes to Donald Trump's policy toward China, because right now we know how powerful is the alliance, the partnership between Russia and China. How do you see his policy toward China if he wins the 2024?
Well, it's interesting because since the assassination, he stated that he was very good friends, quote unquote, very good friends with President Xi Jinping. in the past, he said they loved each other. You know, he uses these kind of strange terms that make it seem that he really cares about these leaders who are America's enemies. And he said that Xi Jinping is a great guy. Now, I would disagree with every single one of those, but I would applaud Trump for actually wanting to work with President Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, especially of Russia, to forge a peaceful coexistence, a world in which we perhaps have some kind of de facto spheres of influence. We have guardrails against going to war. Taiwan is not, we tell China that we will not defend Taiwan militarily, so they won't attack us preemptively, and we can avoid, a World War III, and continue to do the same thing with Russia with regards to Ukraine, and dial that down. Pull of our military troops and bases and spy bases out of Russia, and even our nuclear weapons, redeploying those nuclear weapons from Western Europe to the Western Pacific, where they're desperately needed to deter Chinese aggression. Because I do think that China plans to blockade Taiwan probably in October. I think the U.S. should not respond militarily to that. I think we should respond with massive sanctions, and those sanctions are going to be rough. The economy could go into depression here in the United States. It could cause even perhaps a global depression. But I think that's a course correction that's needed, even if they don't invade, because we need to kind of liberate our economy and restore our economic independence from China. The U.S. during World War II, we produced all of our own necessities and manufactured goods, and we were essentially self-sufficient. We could have been blockaded on all sides, and we still would have been fine, because we had all of the raw materials and the rare earths and everything else we needed to produce our own foodstuffs and fuel and weapon systems here in the U.S. And that's something I think we need to return to, so we can stop having all these endless wars. Whether it's oil in the Middle East, or, as Lindsey Graham said, all these strategic minerals and that are in Ukraine that we can exploit, for imperialist purposes, as he wants to do, if we can just get Russia to end the war on terms that he thinks are favorable.
And what's so fascinating about Donald Trump and his attitude is, unlike most of politicians, he's constructing his relationship based on his personal connection with the guy, with Putin, with Xi, and he tries to make a foundation over his personal relationship and then go after something bigger. And don't you find this so fascinating? We haven't seen anything like this for such a long time in the United States.
It is fascinating. I mean, we have to remember that President Trump, he was, a neophyte, a political neophyte when he was elected president. He had no political experience whatsoever. He'd never been elected to any, even city council, or some county council or anything like that. And so that's why when he became president, he kind of relied on his skills as a CEO of the Trump organization, his business negotiating skills, and just what you referred to, kind of having the personal rapport to be able to negotiate kind of a win-win, diplomatic agreement. And I think he's very good at that. I think with China, with the trade deal, I think he was. I mean, China was never gonna keep the trade deal. I think with regards to the agreement, the USMCA, I think that was a worse agreement than the one that he used it to replace. That NAFTA, I think, was better than that. But in terms of with Russia, I think he really does have the negotiating skills that we need to restore peace and stability to Europe, to end the war in Ukraine that's killed or wounded almost 1 million Ukrainians. And that is something that's, it's a blessing, would be a blessing, not just for Ukraine, but, the world in general, because we face the possibility a third world war that could quickly escalate to the nuclear level. At this point, Biden ISS has crossed Russia's nuclear red lines, which means that the first sign that we have that we've actually crossed Russia's nuclear red lines could be a nuclear mushroom cloud over Kyiv, or perhaps even over NATO headquarters in Brussels, and that's something we don't want to see.
Yeah. The other challenge for the Trump administration would be the conflict in Gaza. And in your opinion, how he can manage the conflict and convincing Netanyahu to change his attitude in this conflict? Because we know in his recent interview with an Israeli media, he said that what you're doing right now in Gaza is not helping you. Everybody's just getting so angry about what you're doing. And how do you see Donald Trump's policy in Gaza and in Israel?
Well, I think Trump is of two minds on the Gaza conflict. I mean, on one hand, he has made those really good statements against Netanyahu that you've really crushed your international credibility for Israel with all these bombings of innocent civilians. It's a losing battle for Israel to keep doing that. And then on the other hand, of course, both in both parties, but I think especially in the Republican Party, support for Israel is just kind of like it's like a sacred cow. You can't not support Israel. Um, the problem is, I think it's important that Trump and other Republican leaders do what I take my position, which is I support Israel overall, but that doesn't mean I'm going to support every decision they make. Certainly with regards to the war in Gaza. I mean, I want to see, in some ways, I want to see Israel, have a good settlement, certainly when the war in Gaza. But I want to see it to be I want it to be fair and just for the Gazans, and that would include some level of autonomy, self-determination. I personally, this war has made me actually switch. I've never supported a two or three state solution for the Palestinians. Now I really want to see that happen. I think that's what needs to happen. I think that's the only solution. There's no reason why they couldn't have their own state, whether it's de facto or internationally recognized, because that's just self-determination. As a nationalist, self-determination is one of, I think, the most important principles of international law and diplomacy. So I think that Trump could be. I think that he would try to work to push for peace in Gaza, and I think a fair peace, but at the same time, Israel. I think the current leadership of Israel, Netanyahu, he's really difficult to persuade, and I think what we need is a president who's willing to pressure him by suspending arms until Israel ends the war in Gaza with a permanent ceasefire.
Yeah. Just to wrap up this session, David, we know that Trump in his first term, when he was a candidate, when he was debating Hillary Clinton, he said that he's gonna withdraw the US troops in Syria. And do you think that he would be able to do such a thing? I'm not talking about specifically about Syria. These things that United States is not going to go each and everywhere to manage the situation there, and just bring them back to the United States and make a new policy that would benefit the United States in long term.
I think that Trump's instincts are to withdraw all our troops from Syria and Iraq, and I think that he would. It really just depends on who he picks as his national security advisor, for example, as his Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State. I mean, those are kind of the main positions which people that were neoconservatives that advised him not to do that. But he announced, I think it was on Twitter, at least two times that he had withdrawn all troops from Syria, and unfortunately, that was false. I mean, and reportedly he was mad that his direction that all U.S. troops would be withdrawn was not adhered to. Was essentially sabotaged again by deep state officials in his administration. But I'm hopeful that that's something that he would be able to accomplish in a second term.
Yeah. Before wrapping up, right after the failed assassination of Donald Trump, CNN just put out that Iran is behind this failed assassination. Do you think that they're trying to make, even before Trump win in 2024, they're trying to make some sort of pressure on Donald Trump to have a new war? I don't know where, in the Middle East or somewhere else, against a country. Do you think that that's possible to do that with Donald Trump?
If there's some way that they could deceive him, as if a certain country were trying to we're trying to assassinate him, perhaps that's possible. But Trump had the chance to go to war with Iran, when he was president, and he vetoed that. He vetoed the advice of his advisors to go to war with Iran. After the Soleimani assassination, that was kind of as far as he was willing to go. And Iran, of course, fired, I think, dozens of missiles at U.S. military bases, and there were scores of injuries, but no deaths from U.S. military servicemen stationed in Iraq. And he chose not to respond to that. He chose to de-escalate. So, his instincts are not to start any new wars. He's campaigned on that. I think the chances of him starting any new wars are very low. Unlike with Biden, who seems to revel in starting new wars and making the world burn with all these unnecessary conflicts. So yeah, I mean, in terms of Iran wanting to assassinate Trump, I think that's credible. I think we don't know. We know that there were 3 encrypted foreign bank accounts that the shooter had under his name. So I think the chance of him being paid by a foreign source are high. Perhaps even more likely, he was paid by the CIA through a foreign source for the hit on Trump, because there's, I'm working on an article about a deep state conspiracy to kill President Trump because he supports peace with Russia. Largely, that's probably the main reason, but perhaps other reasons as well. The Democrats obviously despise Trump. Because all his mean tweets, even though he governed as more of a centrist, much more of a centrist president than Joe Biden has, and kind of really compromised with the Democrats on a lot of fiscal issues and social programs and whatnot. He's been pilloried by the Biden regime media as a threat to democracy, when in fact Biden has been destroying democracy single-handedly as the most authoritarian president we've had since at least FDR. So yeah, I think that he would not start a new war. I think he likely would not attack Iran. But perhaps if he was convinced that Iran was paid the assassin, that he might want to retaliate militarily.
And Antony Blinken recently, in his latest interview, he said that Iran is 2 weeks away from building a nuclear bomb. First of all, how did you find this statement? And if Iran is 2 weeks away from getting nuclear bomb, is not better to have some sort of political negotiations with Iran instead of having more tensions?
So I think we've been hearing that same thing for like 15 plus years. I may remember back in around 2007 that Iran was, weeks away from a bomb. At least first it was 3 months, then it was 3 weeks, and then it's, maybe 3 days. Gets closer and closer. But in fact, my assessment is that Iran has had nuclear weapons for perhaps 15 to 20 years. And they've chosen not to reveal that. So for various reasons we probably don't have time to discuss, but I think that I don't think it's not so much that we need to have direct negotiations with Iran. The biggest irritant for Iran is the war in Gaza. So we end the war in Gaza, We need to pull all our troops out of Iraq and Syria, perhaps even Jordan, or at least Eastern Jordan, from I think Tower 22, or wherever it was that we had three American deaths, soldiers killed by Iranian backed Iraqi militias. And just those moves alone, whether that was part of a diplomatic negotiation or not, I don't think it needs to be. I think it needs, that could just simply be our unilateral moves that show we don't want war with Iran. And I think if we did that, Iran would be motivated to kind of call off its proxies, and without the Houthis attacking us, international shipping, without the Iraqi militias that are Iranian controlled attacking us, and in the Middle East with a withdrawal of U.S. forces, I think our relations with Iran would improve substantially, and I think that's a good thing. I view China and Iran as enemies. I mean, the current regimes, I don't think will ever not be adversaries. But I want to have peace with our adversaries. I don't want to have any conflicts with our adversaries. I want to have understandings. Um, During the Cold War with the Soviet Union, Reagan, quote unquote, we won the Cold War. We didn't really win the Cold War, but the Soviet Union under Gorbachev decided to disband its empire and collapse the Soviet Union. And the only way that we were able to do that was through peaceful agreements. If Reagan had remained belligerent, as he was during his first term, I think the Soviet Union might still exist today. If all the other presidents since have been equally belligerent, I think the Soviet Union would still exist. So, understanding that period of history, that our success was in avoiding war with the Soviet Union, was having a sphere of influence agreement in terms of the Yalta agreement that both sides accepted. We had a red line, the Iron Curtain, so to speak, between the Eastern and Western Bloc. As bad as that was, and as much of an abject surrender that was at the Yalta Appeasement Pact conference, it served us very well. It kept the nuclear and great power peace for over half a century. Neither side violated it until we welcomed in Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary into NATO. And so that serves as a useful template for what we need to do with Russia and China to prevent war, a third world war from breaking out that could cost the lives of up to 1 billion people.
Thank you so much, David, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Thank you, Nima. It was an honor to be on the show.